Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Leatherface, Pinhead, Chucky, Leprechaun, Pennywise. There are many movie monsters out there, but as far as on-screen kill count goes, none match Jason Voorhees of the Friday the 13th franchise. Across 12 films, video games, comics, novelizations, and original novels, the unstoppable masked boogeyman has killed hundreds. The only obstacle he has yet to overcome is that of corporate politics. That is what is preventing new Jason movies from being made, and as of Halloween 2017, we are officially in the longest stretch between Jason movies in the 37-year history of the franchise. In this video, we will look back at the franchise, its transition from Paramount to New Line, the crossover with Freddy Krueger, and explore the corporate and legal issues which are currently preventing more installments from getting made. John Carpenter's breakout hit Halloween popularized the slasher genre and inspired numerous ripoffs and similarly themed movies. They didn't require much in the way of sets, and there were no shortage of willing actors. The most expensive thing to pay for was makeup effects, but of all the movies utilizing the tropes set out in Halloween, one stood out from the others: Friday the 13th. Written by Victor Miller and produced by Sean S. Cunningham, the 1980 indie film featured the reopening of Camp Crystal Lake, the site where a young boy, Jason Voorhees, had drowned 20 years earlier. One by one, counselors of the about-to-be-reopened camp were killed off by a mysterious assailant, until the final girl learned the killer's identity, the mother of the young boy who drowned all those years ago. She had wanted revenge on all camp counselors for the ones that were drinking, smoking pot, and having premarital sex instead of watching over her son. The movie was funded and ultimately owned by Georgetown Productions, but after seeing an early cut of the film, Paramount bought the domestic distribution rights, while Warner secured the international distribution rights. Despite poor reviews, Friday the 13th turned out to be one of the most successful films of 1980. Following this success, Paramount acquired worldwide distribution rights and immediately began working on a sequel. The initial idea involved using the moniker Friday the 13th on a series of standalone films that would be released once a year, without sharing continuity with one another. This never came to pass. It was decided that the sequel would follow the original and feature Jason Voorhees, who made a dreamlike appearance at the end of the first movie, would be the new killer. The writer and director of the original were not sold on this idea, but Steve Miner, associate producer on the first film, believed in it. Miner would then go on to direct the second and third movies. It was these Steve Miner-helmed installments, which were overseen by Paramount head honcho Frank Mancuso Jr., and not the original movie, that would set the template and tropes for the rest of the franchise, including Jason becoming increasingly unkillable and donning the iconic hockey mask. The Motion Picture Association of America forced the team to cut about 30 seconds to get an R rating the first time out, but when it became a hit, they fell under pressure to enforce stricter regulations on censorship, resulting in many of the films that followed being severely edited prior to release. Professional critics were also not kind to the series.
Friday the 13th, the final chapter, is 90 minutes of teenagers being strangled, stabbed, impaled, chopped up, and mutilated. That's all this movie is just mindless, bloody violence. And just think of the message this film offers to its teenage audience. I think the people who made this movie ought to be ashamed of themselves, and that's what I think, Gene.
No.
And I'm going to vote no.
I had a feeling you might. I got as upset as you did. It's just a mayhem film. You might as well watch car accidents edited together. That the film is literally about stabbing. In other words, if you like this picture, what you have liked, I believe, is the idea that someone will get a stick put through their body, because that's the essence of this movie.
And what do they see for 2 hours? Just cynical
It's terrible.
defeatism.
It's terrible. It's a terrible film. I think a much more interesting point is that the message that it sends out is not that this is the way the world is, but that now you've really got on the subject, which is that watching girls, and it's mostly girls again, getting stuck is entertainment. See, that's the pornography.
It's really sick.
That this is legitimate entertainment too. That you can go to a...
Despite being considered exploitative smut by the mainstream film press, Jason Voorhees was, alongside Freddy Krueger, the movie monster of the 80s, appearing in a new movie almost every single year of the decade. Between 1987 and 1990, there was also a TV series bearing the title Friday the 13th. This was mostly for marketing purposes. Despite being made by the same producers as the movies, it did not share continuity or any characters with any of the films. Neither Jason Voorhees or Camp Crystal Lake appear anywhere in the series. As such, it should not be considered part of the Friday the 13th franchise. Even without the TV series, The 80s was the golden era of Jason Voorhees. Between 1980 and 1989, Paramount released a total of 8 installments in the Friday the 13th film franchise, each film building and expanding on the last. Towards the end of the decade, however, franchise fatigue began to set in. Following diminishing financial returns on the last few movies, and a particularly hostile reception to the 8th installment, Jason Takes Manhattan, which at the time was the most expensive and lowest grossing movie in the franchise, Paramount decided to pull the plug. While Jason Voorhees eventually would return, his glory days arguably would not. New Line Cinema, also known as the house that Freddy built, was home of Freddy Krueger and the Nightmare on Elm Street series. In the latter half of the 80s, the Elm Street movies performed far better at the box office than the Friday the 13th movies. As such, Paramount began exploring the possibilities of a Freddy and Jason crossover as a means to reinvigorate the Friday the 13th franchise. To this end, the 7th movie in the Jason franchise, The New Blood, was, at an early stage of its development, intended to be this crossover. Paramount proposed this crossover idea to New Line Cinema, and they were receptive to it. However, the two rival companies did not manage to reach any agreement over distribution or creative control, and so the idea was abandoned for the time. The idea, however, would resurface in the aftermath of Paramount discontinuing the series. With no new Friday the 13th movies in production at Paramount, distribution rights reverted to Georgetown Productions, and they in turn sold the rights to New Line. New Line, however, did not acquire all the rights associated with the franchise. In addition to ownership of the movies they had already made, Paramount retained ownership of certain aspects of the franchise that are associated with those movies, most notably the score and the name Friday the 13th. New Line could not use the theme or the title Friday the 13th in any film, not without buying a separate license from Paramount, but they did control distribution rights to both Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, meaning they were free to make their long-awaited crossover. To help bring this crossover to fruition, the director and producer of the original Friday the 13th, Sean S. Cunningham, returned to the franchise. The crossover, however, was held up by the return of another original creator. Wes Craven returned to New Line to make New Nightmare, the 7th installment in the Freddy Krueger franchise. This took precedence over the crossover that would eventually become Freddy vs. Jason, and allowed Sean Cunningham the chance to bring Jason back into the spotlight with Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. Inspired by the success of Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, the purpose of the movie was to bring an end to the Friday the 13th franchise and set the stage for Freddy vs. Jason. As we pointed out earlier, Sean S. Cunningham had not been involved in the evolution of the Jason Voorhees character or the Friday the 13th franchise since the original movie. Moreover, he had been actively against using Jason Voorhees as a recurring character to begin with. While at Paramount, producer Frank Mancuso Jr. had overseen continuity from one Friday the 13th movie to the next, and ensured that the characters remained consistent, even in a genre known for lack of attention in such matters. With Cunningham's return to the franchise, this went out the window. Cunningham gave Jason Goes to Hell writer and director Adam Marcus a simple mandate: whatever you come up with that gets that damn hockey mask out, let's make that movie. Marcus, who happened to be the best friend of Cunningham's son, had very little experience with writing and directing. His previous job was actually as Cunningham's assistant. The movie took radical departures from past continuity, and upon release in 1993, barely managed to outgross Jason Takes Manhattan. It was also mauled not just by critics, but by a now alienated fan base. In the aftermath of both Jason Goes to Hell and Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which had been well received but underperformed relative to expectations, New Line struggled with a concept which would convincingly allow Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger to cross paths. Over the better part of a decade, New Line spent millions on developing scripts which, among other things, involved Freddy turning a girl into a gigantic lobster, Jason driving a Camaro, the revelation that a young Freddy had sexually assaulted Jason as a child, and Freddy and Jason duking it out in a boxing ring, with noted serial killer Ted Bundy as referee. Freddy vs. Jason was in the deepest circles of development hell, and nobody appeared to have a clue as how to approach the movie. Cunningham was frustrated by the process, and in order to keep Jason Voorhees in the public consciousness, he oversaw development of Jason X, in which Jason Voorhees once again was taken out of Camp Crystal Lake and sent where all horror franchises go to die, into outer space. Due to internal studio politics at New Line, the finished movie sat on the shelf for 2 years before it was released in 2002. It then supplanted Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, as the most expensive and lowest grossing movie of the franchise, which it remains to this day. After writers Damian Shannon and Mark Swift came up with a take that successfully merged the worlds of Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger, things progressed quickly, though not without controversy. Despite the drop in both audience approval and box office from the 7th Jason movie onwards, there was near universal agreement about one aspect of the movies that worked. Kane Hodder, the man behind the mask. A very sizable portion of the fan base were of the opinion that Hodder embodied Jason in a way that none had before him. The appeal of Freddy vs. Jason wasn't merely seeing Jason pitted against Freddy, it was seeing Kane Hodder's Jason pitted against Robert Englund's Freddy. The decision to recast Kane Hodder caused an uproar among fans, but New Line proceeded with the recasting anyway, which fans still maintain was detrimental to the finished movie. There are conflicting stories about who is to blame for the change. Director Ronnie Yu blames the studio, while the studio blames him. According to Cunningham, it was director Ronnie Yu that wanted the recasting against Cunningham's wishes. The studio, who could have stepped in, evidently went along with it. Despite the recasting and other stylistic and directorial decisions that did not sit well with fans, Freddy vs. Jason, released in 2003, turned out to be the biggest hit in either franchise, grossing almost $115 million on a budget of $30 million. That kind of performance justified a sequel, but the producers didn't want Freddy vs. Jason 2 merely to be more of the same. They wanted to bring another big name in the ring. Names like Pinhead and Michael Myers were rumored, but the one that came closest to happening was Ash, of Evil Dead and Army of Darkness fame. Eager to proceed, New Line Cinema attempted to acquire the rights to Sam Raimi's Ash character, but allegedly Raimi wasn't playing ball. Following the success of his studio's Grudge remake, he was more interested in pursuing an Evil Dead remake, and with that, Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash was dead. The story, if the movie had been made, has been told in the comics. With no sequel, Freddy vs. Jason marked the conclusion to the original iterations of both the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street franchises. But as both film series show on screen, death is not always the end. Following the success of Platinum Dunes' Texas Chainsaw Massacre, New Line approached Platinum Dunes about giving the Friday the 13th franchise the same treatment. After extensive negotiations, Paramount gave Platinum Dunes license to use anything from the original films, including the title. In addition to undisclosed terms, Paramount were given the international distribution rights, while New Line retained domestic distribution. Platinum Dunes producers Andrew Form and Brad Fuller wanted to reboot the franchise using elements from the first 4 movies, based on a script by Freddy vs. Jason scribes Damian Shannon and Mark Swift. The Marcus Nispel directed feature opened to a $40 million opening weekend, which was the highest opening weekend for any horror movie at the time, let alone past Friday the 13th movies. It was met, however, with poor reviews, and the box office dropped off significantly in the following weeks. In the end, the film failed to outgross Freddy vs. Jason despite a bigger opening weekend. The following year in 2010, Platinum Dunes' other high-profile remake, A Nightmare on Elm Street, was reviled by nearly all critics and fans alike. And with that film underperforming at the box office, all talk of a sequel to Friday the 13th vanished. In an April 2010 interview with Collider, Brad Fuller explained that the making of the 2009 remake was a joint effort by Paramount and New Line, as they both owned portions of the Friday the 13th franchise. With the economy in a recession at the time, both studios were limiting the films that they produced each year, opting instead for projects with lower risks and higher rewards. As such, films like Friday the 13th Part 2 were put on hold with the hope that when the economy recovered, they would move forward with the next installment. Andrew Form explained that since neither studio wanted to walk away from the production of a sequel and have it perform well without their involvement, thus making them look like idiots, there was virtually no chance of one studio walking away from the production, meaning both had to sign off on any new Friday the 13th movie. Eventually, one of the two studios did walk away, for another movie altogether. New Line Cinema is a corporate subsidiary of Warner Bros. A great source of pride for Warner Bros. Is its relationship with talent, and a key talent in their stable is Christopher Nolan. When Nolan was set up to direct Interstellar at Paramount, Warner wanted in on the action. Paramount let Warner Bros. In, but there was a price to pay. According to a June 2013 piece in The Hollywood Reporter, that price, among other things, was New Line's right to co-finance and distribute future movies in the Friday the 13th series. The article hastened to add that this deal was only valid for 5 years, after which New Line would resume ownership of their portion of the Friday the 13th series. But between an undisclosed date in 2013 spanning to 2018, the Friday the 13th franchise was under Paramount's complete control and theirs to do with as they pleased. 1 week later, Derek Mears, who played Jason in the 2009 remake, revealed that Paramount was working with Platinum Dunes to make a new installment as fast as possible. For the next year and a half, nothing more was heard outside of rumors that the next movie might be a found footage film. In March of 2015, it was announced that TV writer Nick Antosca, best known for his work on the TV reboots of Teen Wolf and Hannibal, would write a script for the next installment, which was to be directed by David Bruckner. After some moving back and forth, Paramount finally settled on a release date, Friday the 13th, May of 2016. Remaining true to form, however, this date would not stick. In October of 2015, the Wrap reported that the film had been pushed back to January 13th of 2017. A month and a half after this new release date was announced, in December of 2015, it was announced that director David Bruckner had left the production, and that a new script would be written by Aaron Guzikowski, best known for 2013's Prisoners. Nothing was known about the story until May of 2016, when producer Brad Fuller told The Real World that the Friday reboot was set to be an origin story for Jason, and that his mother would be in the film. This was further confirmed in August of 2016, when Variety also reported that Sahara director Breck Eisner was in talks to direct. 1 month after this report, Paramount pushed back the release date yet again to Friday the 13th of October of 2017. In January of 2017, fans were treated to good news. Bloody Disgusting reported that production on Friday the 13th Part 13 was scheduled to begin 2 months later, in March of 2017, meaning that the movie was on track for its October release date. This good news, however, would not last. Just weeks after this report, on February 6, 2017, Deadline Hollywood reported that the Friday the 13th film had been taken off the release schedule. The reason given was that Paramount, which was and is in deep financial trouble, had panicked over The Ring's underperformance. A lot of pundits, however, were of the opinion that this explanation left something to be desired. Friday the 13th movies can be made on a relatively low budget. The largely positive response to the Gun Media IllFonic video game shows there is still an audience. And Paramount only have a limited window of opportunity to make the movie before New Line once again will enter the fray and demand signing off on creative decisions as well as their cut of the profits. This, combined with the fact that Friday the 13th and Rings are two very different franchises with very different built-in audiences, made the whole reason for canceling the movie seem off. Could another rights issue, one that is tied up in court, have had something to do with this decision? In 1978, the United States Congress amended Section 203 of the copyright law, allowing authors or their heirs to terminate a grant of rights and reclaim ownership of their original property. In June of 2016, Victor Miller, the screenwriter of the original Friday the 13th movie, announced his intention to do exactly that, and reclaim the Friday the 13th copyright for himself in 2018. This is something that a statutory owner can do, which is why ownership of the Terminator copyright has now reverted to James Cameron. However, only the original author, or rather the statutory owner, can file such a claim. If the writing is done under the scope of employment, it is the employer who is considered the statutory author, and the writer can file no such claim. To this end, Horror Incorporated and Manny Company, a successor to the company that originally produced Friday the 13th, filed a lawsuit against writer Victor Miller on August 24th of 2016. They claimed that any and all writing done by Victor Miller was work for hire under Sean Cunningham, which Miller and his legal representatives dispute. Ultimately, it is up to the courts to decide, and if they rule in Miller's favor, a fracturing of the Friday the 13th rights is not off the table. Miller did not create either the title Friday the 13th or the adult version of Jason Voorhees or his hockey mask. He did, however, create the young Jason character that died as a young boy due to the negligence of his camp counselors. So it is not inconceivable that these aspects of the Jason mythos may be awarded to him, meaning they would be off limits in any future Friday the 13th movie, unless Miller licenses them to the production company in question. Depending on how the court rules, the Friday the 13th franchise rights being split between Paramount, New Line, and Victor Miller may be one possible outcome. That ruling, however, would be valid only in the United States. Hypothetically, we could end up with a situation where new Friday the 13th films can be made, but without Jason Voorhees. Following this scenario, Friday the 13th movies featuring Jason could still be made for the international market, but these legally could not be released in the United States. Please note that these are all hypothetical outcomes. At the time of making this video, the actual court ruling is still far off into the future. Despite how hard he may be to kill on screen, corporate politics and legal rights battles are the greatest threats to Jason Voorhees he has ever faced. We do not know yet if he will live to tell the tale. Let us know your thoughts on the matter in the comment section below. If you like this video, then please hit that subscribe button. Due to recent changes made by YouTube, we also encourage all of our subscribers, both new and old, to please hit that bell icon next to the subscribe button as well, so you will be notified when new videos are uploaded. Be sure to check back for news and analysis of the happenings and corporate politics behind the scenes of your favorite genre movies, as well as explorations of your favorite characters and their backgrounds and context here at Midnight's Edge.